It's Friday, May 8th. I ain't got no job and I ain't got well, actually I do. I got a job, pretty awesome job. Got a lot to do. Welcome to the show. Welcome to Jim Webb Podcast. I'm here with Robert Barnes, attorney at law. He is a host of Vivo and Barnes. He is a champion of the underdog and a crusader for the Constitution. Lots of cases he's tried. He's won. My favorite one is the one where you defended Wesley Snipes. Anybody who can stick it to the IRS is a hero to me. Welcome on the show, Robert. And if anything you want to pump, feel free.
Oh yeah, no, glad to be here. The should be a lot of fun. The main event I think we have upcoming for 1776 Law Center. That's a little quilt that one of the members made, which is supports a lot of these causes: food freedom, financial freedom, medical freedom, political freedom. Represented the Covington kids, helped defend them, helped defend Kyle Rittenhouse, helped defend the Amos Miller and the Amish farmers, Brooke Jackson, Dr. Bowden, the Pfizer whistleblower and COVID whistleblowers alike. So and I sort of co-founded the organization. We do as our main fundraiser one annual conference each year. This year is going to be August 1st, August 2nd in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Alexander McCorris is coming in from the Duran, as well as Alex Christoforou, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, ex-CIA analyst Larry Johnson. Looks like Judge Napolitano is going to be able to make it as well. The Chase Hughes on CIA PsyOps. A range of people coming in. You can go to 1776lawcenter.com if you want to get tickets. But it's August 1st, August 2nd. We have limited ticket availability because of space. So people want to go in. But yeah, that's the main organization I try to help promote, because they represent causes and cases in the court of public opinion and in the court of law and reform efforts in Congress that are underrepresented or just completely unrepresented otherwise.
Awesome. That sounds like a heck of a time. Not gonna lie. And thanks for sharing that out there, everybody. I hope you go visit it. And before we go any further, if you would stop by and like and subscribe. This is independent show, independent media, and without your support, we don't exist, and my kids don't eat. So that's hopefully that's enough motivation to get you to go over, click like, subscribe, share with your friends. So Robert, one of the things that I'd like to touch on before we really get into the issues of the day here is, your background. It's really fascinating. You are a self-described populist who hates elitism. That speaks to my heart in ways that, I mean, it's, fellow traveler, basically. So you grew up in Chattanooga, self-described as a hard scrabble upbringing. You went to Yale and then left on a point of principle, which is freaking awesome, man. So if you could walk me through, how your upbringing shaped you and developed your ideas and how that translates into modern day populism.
Yeah, well, like your family, yeah, I trace. So when people accuse us of not being patriotic for supporting some stupid war, I remind them that there's some of us that the founders' blood's literally through our veins. A lot of these other folks, not so much. So that want to call themselves America firsters while they betray the country. But the roots of American populism run deep. It's constitutional populism is strong in my family, going all the way back, part of the founding generation. That came in a little bit after the Mayflower, up through New England, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, New Hampshire, and that region of the country predominantly. My father, his dad died when he was only 1 year old. Ended up in an orphanage until he was adopted by his uncle. Became an accountant, but became an accountant during in a time period later on, mid-career, that you had to be a certified public accountant. It was the rise of the certifications and licensures and all of that, and that put him in a position of economic difficulty where he was constantly underqualified or overqualified for almost every job. So the places he ended up working at often were places that could be a little bit marginal or did things that were a little bit questionable. He would constantly speak out against that kind of bad treatment or bad activities, and he would get blacklisted by it, to where he ended up very much working class in terms of occupational prospects, delivering newspapers, things like that, by the time I was growing up. He passed away, massive heart attack, when I was 11 years old, about 12 days from my 12th birthday. And And so we grew up, depending on things like Social Security for widows and orphans to get by each month, things like that. My sister helped get me a scholarship to a local private parochial school, the McCallie School. Probably in some places, McCallie in some other places, depending on your pronunciation. And then from there, got a scholarship to Yale University. While I was at Yale, they decided they were going to discriminate against poor kids in both the admissions process and the financial aid process. We started a protest organization, but that protest organization they tried to buy off. They basically said, you can have your everything written for you. Just go quiet on this and pretend we're fixing a situation that we're not actually planning on fixing. So I instead left in protest to draw attention to the issue
Mhm.
as a junior there, and me leaving in protest got more attention than the protest group did. The protest group got attention because the editor of the chief of the Yale Daily News at the time, who's now at the New York Times,
Hmm.
David Lionhart, loved the story, so he gave it huge coverage and everything else, and huge coverage within the Yale establishment, the Yale bureaucracy.
Mhm.
And but it was still insufficient. Their response was just, "Hey, let's just buy it off. Let's see how many people we can buy off." And we weren't willing to go along. A buddy of mine, Nick Adamo, grew up homeless in the streets of New York City, and the rest of us. But so I chose to leave in protest to draw attention to it. That got so much attention that they were forced to reverse policy. But after that, went to law school, University of Wisconsin, Madtown, where they taught law in action, which was to realize that there's not only there's the black letter law, and then there's the philosophical concepts that are supposed to guide it and govern it,
Mhm.
and the practical sociological realities of how it's actually enforced and applied in real courtrooms, in real legislative branches, in real executive bureaucracies, which was really educational. Started out where I clerked for an Indian tribe, clerked for a big corporate law firm, clerked for a public interest law firm, went to work for a small solo practitioner in Southeast Tennessee, then a big plaintiffs firm in Wisconsin, then went to work with a buddy of mine doing tax representation in criminal and civil cases, and then went out on my own about 15 years ago or so, and basically was doing a combination of civil rights work, constitutional work, civil and criminal tax defense, outside general counsel litigation work.
Mhm.
And then Trump comes along,
Mhm.
and it was becoming clear that the legal establishment was aligned against him. They were willing to weaponize the legal system already, even back then,
Mhm.
selective IRS leaks and things like that. And so I started doing a lot more pro bono work, started becoming more of a public figure. But then COVID came along, and with COVID, it was clear that all kinds of people were going to get shafted in their basic rights and liberties. That's about the time I started
Mhm.
1776 Law Center. Turned my legal work to about 2/3 pro bono work or contingency, but it was contingency with low chance of recovery most of the time. So it's basically pro bono.
Mhm.
The and Because people are getting attacked on vaccine mandates, attacked with lockdowns, trying to destroy people's businesses, their lives, their liberties, their freedoms, mask mandates, all the rest. The Around that time, I went down to Mexico about a year before. I was on a vacation, and right on the way down there, saw that these kids from Covington Catholic were being attacked by
Mhm.
people like Maggie Haberman and others.
Yeah.
So I went online and said, if anybody wants to sue Maggie and the rest of them, I'll represent them for free. Came back and had a had a lot of clients. So represented the Covington kids pro bono. Did that for We got most of the things we were looking for, not everything, but most of the things.
Mhm.
And it was in that process that I met a little congressman from who represents Covington, Kentucky, known as Thomas Massey.
Oh yeah.
That was the beginning of a lot of that work. And then went on representing Amish farmer Amos Miller, representing Brooke Jackson, the whistleblower on the COVID vaccine, representing Dr. Bowden against the COVID sort of conglomerate on ivermectin and other issues that tried to
Mhm.
strip her of her medical license, representing people in cases and causes all across the country. That's only possible because people support 1776 Law Center.
Right.
Because for about the last 12 years or so, to the begrudgment of some of the people that were working with me at the time, we do a lot of pro bono work these days.
That's amazing. That's great stuff. So with Trump in particular, I want to transition over to politics here in 1 second, but I'd like to get your comment on how he has, I guess, evolved or devolved, I think is a better way to put it. I mean, I'm a three-time Trump voter. I really appreciated his populist message. He seemed to be standing up for the average blue collar worker, and you illustrated a lot of things in there that are very similar to my own family history. So, what was his attraction to you as a candidate, and then how and when did that shift completely away?
I was a fan of Trump the time I was a kid. So after my dad died, there were 2 books I was really fond of or really
Mm,
popular, for me or with me. And that was Robert Francis Kennedy Sr.'s, To Seek a Newer World, his 1968 campaign text that I carried around with me.
mm,
My friend and client, Bobby Kennedy, Bob Robert Kennedy Jr. got a kick out of that.
mm,
And he got a kick out of the story that the other book was Donald Trump's Art of the Deal. Those are my 2 favorite books. Trump talked about expect the best, plan for the worst.
mhm,
Never for, just a good mindset approach to things. But politically, I'd been active. First, I was a young Republican in the '80s. Then I be shifted to being a more populist Democrat in the '90s.
mhm.
But then saw what Bill Clinton was like in person. I interned at the White House in 1993 while
Oh wow.
interning at the AFL-CIO.
Mhm,
And that's why I knew the Monica Lewinsky story didn't add up because interns weren't hanging out with the president. But yeah, I was doing the Sunday morning report and all that, but got a
mhm,
crash course in DC. It was the beginning of the professionalization of the political class with a lot of my fellow Yaleys that were down there. Ran the Yale Political Union. You can still find an old C-SPAN where I'm there with Paul Begala debating NAFTA and some other things. But it was a crash course that DC was not what I liked. And I voted for president in 1992, didn't vote again until 2016. Now, I bet on elections all the way through there
mhm,
because it's something that I've had success in going way back. And initially in 2016, I was just looking at betting on the election. I thought they
mhm,
were underestimating Trump's odds in the election markets. He started out around 2-3% just to be nominated.
mhm.
And you had people like Nate Silver, who I tracked, who didn't even know why he got things right because his underlying assumptions were wrong, like in the 2012 election. So I was looking for an opportunity to fade him anyway. And I start watching Trump and ended up placing very big bets on that election, kind of famously over in the UK. The got covered by all the UK press, the Dublin press, and then ultimately the global press, American press. But in that context, I started liking what Trump was saying. I was like, well, maybe he's serious about this. Like, wouldn't we be better off if we got along with Russia? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we would.
Mhm,
Wouldn't we be better off if we got out of all these stupid Mideast wars? And I was like, yeah, we would. In fact, maybe we should have an industrial policy that actually puts American workers at the head of Wall Street. Oh yeah, this sounds even better. In
yeah.
fact, it made me so nervous. I hired a bunch of other people to do studies and surveys because I was worried I was going to be betting on someone I wanted to see win. Then saw him win. And suddenly, because I bet on George W. Bush in '04, bet on Barack
Mhm,
Obama 2012. Wasn't a big fan of either one. Wasn't a big fan of Bill Clinton by 1994. So I was skeptical of I was kind of like your typical Gen Xer, and I
mhm.
was very skeptical of politics and politicians in general. That we'd grown up in an era in which every single one lies. Poppy
Right.
Bush said he was not going to raise your taxes and was going to avoid war and have a peace dividend from the Cold War. And then we end up in interventions in Panama, wars in Iraq, for Kuwait. As Ross
Yeah.
Perot said, no more blood for oil. And of course did the tax increase he said he wouldn't. Now he did like Pat Buchanan, was friends with Buchanan over the years, great guy, nice guy. But I basically gave up on politics because every time Bill Clinton said he was going to bring peace and prosperity, and instead we get Serbia, we get Somalia, we
Right.
get Sudan. And I'm like, okay, all these guys do. We get Wall Street over everybody. Then George W. Bush says, don't worry, no more world policemen. And then we get Afghanistan and Iraq too. Then we get Barack Hussein Obama. He says, don't worry, I'm going to be the peace candidate. I'm going to do something about the Wall Street going rogue in the global financial crisis. And then we get still in Afghanistan, not quite out of Iraq. And we get to add Syria and Libya to the equation, while Wall Street gets to walk away from all the crimes they committed that sunk the economy in '07 and '08.
Mhm,
And so I was deeply skeptical, but I was like, man, maybe Trump's for real because there was no political gain in saying, let's get along with Russia. Putin had like a 2% approval rating at the time.
Mhm.
Most Americans are so effectively propagandized by the media industrial complex, hinted at in TV shows and movies over a decade. The Ruskies are bad. The Ruskies are dangerous. The Ruskies are coming for you. Really, they're just like East Tennessee, just a little more east when you get to know most Russians. Uh,
Never heard quite like that. That's a good way to put it.
yeah, I mean, they like their guns, they like their pickup trucks, they like their Orthodox Christianity. They don't like a lot of this kind of Hollyweird kind of behavior.
Yeah, and if you come
So
for them, they're gonna die in place.
exactly. And as one Ruski told me many years ago, Barnes, we would rather eat dust than surrender. Certain presidents should take that into mind because the Persians think the same way.
Absolutely.
But so all of that, so I defended him in the court of public opinion, sacrificed professional relationships, personal relationships, political relationships, really for a decade, defending President Trump since 2015. And and then was his lawyer in the 2020 election in Georgia until he decided to go with Rudy Giuliani, who well, I'll tell you stories off the record about Rudy. But and then Sidney Powell, who thought, that she had the Kraken. That was a whole nother thing. But before then, we were rocking and rolling, and defended him very high profile. Again, a lot of slings and arrows. Mark Elias, the Democratic election lawyer, tried to get me disbarred in the state of California. All of that. So, and continued to fight for him and then started a little podcast with Viva Frei, Law for the People, during COVID. After working with Alex Jones and defended Alex Jones in the court of public opinion, and for a period of time trying to get up to the Texas Supreme Court. We'll see if they get back around to it. And supported Trump 2024. Supported Robert Kennedy, supported Tulsi Gabbard, supported J.D. Vance. Was very, very hopeful. The first 3 months of 2025 looked awesome. We got Doge. We're finally going to get accountability. Finally get rid of U.S. aid. Finally do something about this overgrown, bloated, cancerous bureaucracy. There was a ceasefire for a period of time in Gaza. Withdrawal of money and munitions for Ukraine, and no attacking on Russia. It was looking great. Epstein files were going to get disclosed. James Comey was going to face accountability. John Brennan was going to face accountability. These deep state criminals. Everything was looking hopeful and optimistic. Then the Epstein file reversal happens. Then the fall happens when I believe he started to experience early onset or early stage behavioral dementia. And all the key things that went into good Trump decision-making in the past, seeking out second and third opinions, always have a contingency plan, always prepare for the worst, as he liked to put it. Having a real, he's known for his marketing, but sometimes that gets conflated with a range of things. He's not a confabulator historically, but all of a sudden he starts getting basic facts wrong, inventing things that are just obviously not true, saying things either are not true or saying, or believing things are true that are not. He starts to basically give into the donor class full scale, doesn't have an exit plan, gets enraged if anybody gives him a second opinion. And that started to happen in the fall. Makes a deal with Putin in Anchorage to get us out of Ukraine, never fulfills and delivers the deal. Then all of a sudden we go in briefly with Iran the first time, but it looks like we're just going to be in and out, no biggie. That's the end of that. And then all of a sudden the drum beats start happening again in the late fall, early February, early January. Mm-hmm. And then we see everything else fall by the wayside. All of a sudden, mass deportations don't look like they're happening. It looks like he's pulling back on that. The Justice Department becomes an open cash register, pay for play scheme, whether you're talking about pardons, civil cases, fraud cases, antitrust cases, lobbyists like Mike Davis, who aren't even registered as a lobbyist, which is a federal felony, out there pretending to be working for MAGA when behind the scenes he's working for big corporations to sabotage this. Insider trading starts becoming very apparent, really peaked during the war conflict. You got all kinds of conflicts of interest with Witkoff and Kushner. Kushner is supposed to be out of this. Suddenly he's back into this. And while he's doing deals with the Saudis, while he's dealing deals with the Israelis, while he's dealing deals with the Emiratis that are lining his pockets to the tunes of billions of dollars. So everything seemed to just go off the rails by early winter. Not only is his mental health appears to be declining by his behavioral, and this is not language cognitive decline, but behavioral decline. Mm-hmm. And then parallel to it, appears that the donor class and has completely taken over almost all of the administration's more populist priorities and sabotaged them all. And along the way, he's attacking some of his most loyal and longstanding allies, like Alex Jones, like Tucker Carlson,
Mhm.
Marjorie Taylor Greene, like Thomas Massey.
Rand Paul.
The yeah, exactly. Rand Paul, Ron Paul. I mean,
Mhm.
just goes through all of it. Where if you're from the libertarian side, he's attacking you. If you're from the populist side, he's attacking you. And you could see his base start to completely fracture. The independent, nonpartisan part of his base that was new MAGA in 2024 is complete, Hispanic voters, black voters, younger voters, all off the train, very unhappy with him. And then increasingly the OG MAGA, the working class swing voters of the industrial Midwest and the rural Midwest that are deeply anti-war. All of a sudden he starts losing them in droves. And all he's got left is some boomer cons watching Fox News who think we're winning in Iran, the economy is booming, gas prices are down. Trump said gas prices are down, so gas prices must be down.
Or the
I
last
mean,
time he drove was just being honest. Like when was the last time this guy actually drove a vehicle to a gas station and filled the pump? Let alone, I
yeah.
mean, like with his financial background, it wouldn't even be a blink. But the act of it, right?
And while all this is going on, he's doing people with dog masks and the parties at Mar-a-Lago. He's wanting $1 billion for a big new fancy ballroom. He's talking about building some big fancy arch. He puts a 50-foot golden statue of himself for the new Trump library that's modeled after the North Korean leader. I mean, it's like he's gone off. We're seeing a Trump that I have never seen before. And he's the Trump that Democrats and the media caricatured him as.
Right.
So because of that, they don't recognize how different this Trump is and thus how dangerous some of his decision making can be.
Mhm.
And his old, parts of his Trump base that are sticking with it are like, well, they've always accused Trump of this. So this must not be true because it's like the old crying wolf. And they don't realize Trump has turned into a wolf. The media don't realize it. A good part of his own base doesn't realize it. And you could see it every day in his behavior. Total loss of filter. I mean, he would go after people, but he wouldn't go after his own longstanding allies in his first term. He would
Mhm.
go after people, but he would very rarely attack them on things like their wife dying
Right.
and attacking them for remarrying years later. I mean,
Mhm.
for a guy who's cheated on every wife or girlfriend he's ever had. That's not a good idea anyway. But this shows a complete one of the signs of early stage behavioral dementia is you just lose all your filters.
Yeah.
Trump also, I mean, from behind the scenes, he was known as an empathetic guy, contrary
Absolutely.
to the caricature of him.
Mhm.
Big tipper, hated to see American soldiers die. Was bothered by war, by death anywhere. That's why he avoided so much of it in his first term, bragged about it throughout after his first term. No new wars, Trump.
Mhm.
And now he's the guy who doesn't care how many soldiers die. He doesn't care how many Americans die. He doesn't care about it. He doesn't care how many other people die in war. He celebrates it. He thinks it's an ego boost. He's running around thinking he's one day the Pope, the next day a Roman emperor. After that, he thinks he's Jesus. I mean, he's completely lost his mind. People around the White House know he's lost his mind, but nobody wants to say anything about it. The military is trying to stand up to him as we speak, saying you can't do some of the things you're talking about doing. You can't take out civilian bridges. You can't take out civilian buildings. You can't take out civilian infrastructure. You can't use nuclear weapons. And by the way, we don't want to go back in, period, because we can't defend the Gulf.
Right.
But he is so delusional and so ego-driven at the moment that he can, every time there's an exit ramp that J.D. Vance gets him, Trump blows it up. He's done this 3 different times already in ways people won't know about until 5 years from now. So it's been, I call it the great betrayal. I think it's the greatest betrayal in American political history. Because
Agreed.
even though all those other guys ran on this, a lot of people still didn't believe him. People gave up personal, professional sacrifices for supporting the Trump that they believed in. And what we've seen the last 3 months ain't the Trump they believed in. It's George W. Bush's third term.
You are absolutely correct. And before we transition here, 2 different things. I remember working in the Senate for Rand Paul during his first term, and he wouldn't chastise Rand Paul. He would call and say, "Hey, how do we fix this? How do we get to where I want to go?" He would take Rand's advice, and really the worst thing that would happen, at least publicly, would be a lack of influence, right? And we were always competing in that office for tea times, basically, with Lindsey Graham, and that's an unfortunate thing. So there was a balance you had to do internally about criticism of what he was doing, but the way to do it was to kind of coach him into the right lane. Now you've got him out there calling Rand Paul one of the worst senators in history. He's going after Thomas Massey's wife, and it's a completely different equation, like you're talking about. And to go back to some of the strikes in Iran, and I guess in that first administration, the calculus he went through was how many people were going to die on both sides in retaliation, and he wanted to hit basically empty pieces of concrete, not necessarily to avoid escalation, but through that compassion that you're talking about, and that's obviously gone. We're talking about how we have to eat $200 a gallon gas as an individual consumer because it's worth not having a nuclear weapon in Iran, when the logic behind them having one prior to all of this was kind of sketchy in the first place. But I'd like to pivot over to Thomas Massey here for a second, and you've tweeted about this. I keep saying tweet; it's X now. But the influence of foreign money in the electoral process. And Chris, if you get that clip from.
So it's now a core tenet of the Republican Party that you have to hide the crimes of a left-wing Democrat who was touching kids.
It seems to be. This is the main charge that's been leveled against me, that I don't vote with the party enough. When the party votes for warrantless spying on Americans, I don't vote for that.
Warrantless spying on Americans.
Yes, I'm actually taking a position that Donald Trump had less than 2 years ago. He was against the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act being used to spy on Americans without a warrant because it was used against him, he found out. And then covering up for pedophiles. I didn't vote for that. The president's own children, the vice president, the FBI director, and the president himself said that they would release the Epstein files. I worked harder than anybody else to get it done and got it done. And that's part of the 10% where they say, I have betrayed the Republican Party.
Because you voted to disclose Epstein's crimes.
Correct.
Now, there's a lot to work with there. I mean, I had the privilege of being able to work with Thomas Massey on the Hill. He is just an absolutely fine human being, and he needs to win. And there's two different parts to this. One being FISA. FISA is an absolute travesty. I would say I'm not the lawyer in this conversation, but it is an absolute total violation of the Fourth Amendment. I don't understand how you can logically say that a 99+% approval rating on a warrant to get into your phone, which has 2 hops, so everybody that you talk to and everybody they talk to without the ability to represent yourself in a courtroom, is anyway legal. And the ironic thing, which Mr. Massey brought up there, was that it's being used to spy on Trump, and it was used to undermine his campaign in 2016, probably again in 2020. And then you have Massey's current primary, in which there have been an unreal amount of money dumped in there, where you have effectively a foreign government trying to buy a seat. How dangerous is all of this?
Well, I mean, it's extraordinary. I mean, this is the most consequential primary this cycle. It is the most consequential election this cycle. It may be one of the most consequential elections in the last quarter century. And the reason for that is you have someone like Thomas Massey, who's an independent representative of his voter constituency in eastern and northern Kentucky, a community that has a long history of war skepticism. That if you want to go back to find the one House member who refused to vote for the Gulf of Tonkin resolution to drag us into Vietnam, he was a good war-serving Republican from eastern Kentucky. Mm-hmm. You can find similar histories in eastern Tennessee and southern Ohio. So, I mean, right across the border, Warren Davidson, a good congressman from southern Ohio, from J.D. Vance country, also continues to oppose the extension of the war and the misuse of FISA and the like. So you have in Thomas Massey the number one opponent of the deep state, the number one opponent of the surveillance state, the number one opponent of the Federal Reserve in the House, the number one opponent of the CIA in the House, the number one opponent of the military-industrial complex in the House, the number one opponent of forever wars in the House, the number one opponent of big pharma in the House, the number one opponent of big ag in the House, the number one opponent of the donor class in the House. And so then the question is, can those institutionally corrupt interests that have been trying to separate our founding documents and constitutional republic from its institutions of proper influence, like the voters, can they buy a seat? And what is particularly pernicious here is that it's a foreign lobby that is taking the lead trying to buy this seat. There's big pharma involved and big ag involved and the military industrial complex and the surveillance state advocates and the deep state rogues and the war machine folks all involved too. But at the lead are people who have dual loyalties because they have dual citizenship. There are people like Miriam Adelson. They are people like Paul Singer and John Paulson. These are people that are Wall Streeters. These are people that are Israel firsters. These are people that want to use American power and use American leverage in order to help Israel develop its greater Israel project and dominate the Middle East, and want us involved in forever wars, want us to drain our treasury, want us to destroy our political movements here at home solely to serve their cause above all others. And the question is, can they buy a seat? Can they buy a member of the House by basically having someone defeat Thomas Massey? And then the entire political consulting class, everybody in the swamp is looking at this seat. Because if Massey loses, then the political class wins, the foreign lobbies win, the military-industrial complex wins, the surveillance state wins, big pharma and big ag win. And it sends a message to not only D.C., but to the whole country and around the world that they can take out principled opponents of their globalist, elitist, oligarchic power structure that they're trying to superimpose on the United States of America, and that has captured the White House itself in the last 6 months. And that's why his race is, if you're opposed to the surveillance state, if you're for food freedom, financial freedom, political freedom, medical freedom, opposition, the number one leader against vaccine mandates in the House of Representatives, Thomas Massey. The number one opponent to the COVID mandates in the House was Thomas Massey. The number one opponent of forever and endless wars in the House on the Republican side, Thomas Massey. Number one opponent of them, being able to turn your car off if they don't like the way you're driving or the government objects, like out of the Vault 7 CIA leaks from a couple of years ago, but on steroids. Number one opponent of it, Thomas Massey. Number one opponent of them spying on us without getting a warrant under an extension of FISA, Thomas Massey. Number one opponent of the Federal Reserve debasing our currency, Thomas Massey. So if you care about food freedom, financial freedom, medical freedom, political freedom, you don't want us in endless wars, then you got to support Thomas Massey. And the advantage is everybody out there can do it. MasseyMoneyBomb.com. This is crowdsourcing campaigns, crowdsourcing the independent representatives for us to represent. It's literally America first, because it's either Israel gets to have a seat in the House that says Covington on file, but is really Tel Aviv, in fact. I mean, how many House members and senators do we got to have representing Tel Aviv? Just like a few more representing America. But they want to, and they do it by taking out their number one opponent, the number one advocate of America first in the House of Representatives. And that's why his race is so important, so critical. And if Massey wins 2 Tuesdays from now, then on Tuesday the 19th, then that is our best chance to send a message to the White House to get out and take the exit ramp from the Iran war, rather than continuing doubling down, tripling down, and quadrupling down like a bad gambler that Trump is currently addicted to.
Right.
In fact, you can predict his strategy. Just read the Manic Gambler strategy. And it's been Trump's strategy throughout this whole thing. If I just double down one more time, it's going to come up 21 at the blackjack table.
Of course, it always works, doesn't it? Everybody who does that at the blackjack table goes home and has a house and still has a wife and gets up the next morning and they are independently wealthy because of their overplay. It's a tale as old as time, really. And I thank you for saying that about Massey. If there was one guy in the House who is absolutely kind of OG America first, he's the guy. He is the guy. He's a guy who, if you're working on the outside, you cannot talk to him. He will not talk to anybody, any organization that takes money from potentially from a special interest or a foreign lobby, because the man has principles, but he's also totally approachable, and he's got some very common sense things. And I hope people will, take your advice here and go to Massey Money Bomb and help him out. Not that I'm necessarily advertising for him, but I think we have a tremendous amount of stake in making sure that, the premier liberty candidate or premier liberty representative, probably in the House and the Senate, maintains, his seat. Otherwise, we've got, some bigger problems, although I think there might be a little silver lining on the back end. I mean, I wouldn't call it a Pyrrhic victory if he loses, but it would very much illustrate the power these people have if we don't already know it. But the back end of even that is that if he does lose, then, the reach within our system is shown to be, I think, pretty much limitless. And I really don't want to see that, to be honest.
Well, you look at his opponent, Special Ed Gallery.
Oh, man.
This is a guy his only donation I think ever in politics was to Lindsey Graham,
Yeah.
Lady Lindsey, Queen of the War Horse, always inviting us into their brothel of blood. This is a guy who quit the Republican Party in 2016 because he was so mad at Donald Trump getting elected president.
How is he back? Like, I don't understand this.
Well, not only that, he's afraid to fill out Second Amendment questionnaires. He's afraid to fill out pro-life questionnaires. He refuses to go out and meet the voters one-on-one. He has refused every single debate. Every single debate. It's a local elementary school, and he's afraid to answer those little kids' questions. That's how bad it is. This guy has run a basement campaign that makes Biden's basement campaign look much more accessible by comparison. That's what a complete crock this guy is, and that's what the system wants. The system wants to shove it in your face. We can elect a complete loser, a complete liar, and take out one of the great members of Congress, because that's how much we control your representatives. That's how much we own your House and Senate and White House. That pretty soon they might as well paint the White House in Israeli white and blue. Do it the Jeffrey Epstein Island style, because they want the person to be. It was the reason why Rush Limbaugh picked Sean Hannity. He was like, look, clearly I'm awesome because this guy's one of the dumbest people on the planet. And I get him, millions of people to watch every night thinking he's smart. He picked somebody dumb because he wanted to make Limbaugh look good. The same thing is here. The system wants to shove it in our faces. What a complete joke and crock and embarrassment. I mean, I've called that a lot of what Trump OG supporters have to go through in the last several months is a self-humiliation ritual. Certain Catholic Opus Dei traditions, where you whip, all that jazz. It's that kind of thing. Exactly. It's come out and say the Strait is open. No, and that's good. No, the Strait is closed. Oh no, and that's good. The Strait is open, neither open nor closed. That too is good. I mean, these people have to humiliate themselves daily by reversing long-standing positions, by having to and by contradicting themselves within the same day. Not only contradicting themselves over years, by pretending there's 12D chess. It's something that doesn't meet 1D checkers. So but that's what this Massey race is about. Special ed, a man who's scared of debate, won't fill out questionnaires, won't talk to voters, afraid of even answering the questions of a 5-year-old, is the guy they want to stick in the House because they want you to know that foreign lobbies and the donor class and the deep state control the House of Representatives.
Yeah. So speaking of the Strait and foreign lobbies getting influence in the White House and starting wars, we got some breaking news. I was just sent something. It's from OSINT Defender. Now, I don't know if this has been completely and totally verified by ominous Thomas. Oh, we got CBS up there. So yesterday, we had a bit of tit for tat in the Strait, and it was unclear, and there was some speculation as to whether our ships were under fire. But CBS is saying 10 sailors are claimed to be wounded and 5 are missing, which means they probably went overboard, and that is never good. So here we go again. The toll keeps going, and if you could talk for a second here about war powers and just the base illegitimacy of this conflict. And this, I mean, from a personal level, every time I see one of these casualty reports come in, my skin crawls. I've been there up front, and I've got friends who are out there still doing it. As a caveat, none of this is a comment on our men and women who are stepping forward and fighting. We got some of the best people in this country out there in the military, but you got to use them for the right reasons and primarily in the interest of the United States. And you had this great tweet earlier in this week about, the expiration or the termination of war powers earlier, but could you run it back for us?
Oh, absolutely. So, I mean, so we have like 3 different levels of standards. Now, I do get a kick out of Mike Waltz and Secretary Rubio and Haig's death, as I like to call him, the Secretary of War. At least which he's well correctly titled. He's just incompetent at it. I've said, the Trump third term has a bunch of people on it that are like Bush's people, but retarded. Like how he said, Joe Biden was LBJ, but retarded. That,
Right.
Pete Haig's death is, Rumsfeld, but retarded, which is, stunning to see. But from a legal, but all these guys are like, we got to respect international law. In fact, I'm getting lectured by this online. Well, international law about the Strait of Hormuz. I was like, huh? Wasn't I just told 3 months ago the international law is dead and only losers care about the international law? Isn't that what Stephen Miller argued on TV? Isn't that what Rubio himself was arguing? And all of a sudden we care about international law. Oh, okay. The very selective interpretation and application of it. So the international law does actually matter. It's referenced as the law of nations in our Constitution. That's where in fact, Vattel's great book on it was read by all the founders back at the time. So you have a three-level standard. You have what does Congress authorize, what does the Constitution authorize, and what does the law of nations authorize, to the degree that is too reflected either in a treaty that we have signed through the law reflected in the law of nations as enforceable through the Constitution, or as passed by Congress. And so in this context, the Congress exclusively, our founders gave the authority to declare war, to start any kind of kinetic conflict. The War Powers Resolution Act of 1973 was intended to codify these competing provisions, the right to declare war exclusively with Congress. However, the president as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of the United States, both these executive branch, Article 1 and Article 2, legislative and executive branch powers competing with each other. And even though it was clear the president was deliberately stripped of his power to declare war, which included, was very, very broad. A blockade is a declaration of war, for example. All of these things, well established for a long time, even all the way back to our founding. Contrary to what a lot of people say, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and others were very careful to get congressional authorization before the Barbary Pirates actions, for example. There's all these mythologies out there about that. They knew exactly what that meant, and they didn't want one man, no matter how good or great that man may be, to determine getting us into kinetic conflict. And so there's no question about that. And then what is Congress authorized under the War Powers Resolution Act to try to spell it out in statutory terms, that if we are attacked and our self-defense under both principles of necessity and proportionality are met. And the way I always try to explain to people, if you couldn't do it as a person in your local neighborhood, then neither can the U.S. government do it. The principles of self-defense under international law, constitutional law, the War Powers Resolution Act, statutory congressionally passed law, or local state tort and constitutional law for individual criminal cases, all have the same principles in it, including the United Nations conventions and treaties that we are signatory to, Hague conventions that we are signatory to, Geneva conventions that we are signatory to. And so, there's a lot been reference to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas. The U.S. has never signed that, nor for that matter has Iran. But there might be principles in it that can be represented and reflected in otherwise the law of nations as it applies to the U.S. I did get Secretary Rubio. He was complaining about whether Iran was improperly doing war without declaring it. Like that's not in the Constitution or in Congress. Is that Iran has to come to the United States Congress to get authorization to declare war? So just a little FYI for Secretary Rubio, Narco Marco, as I like to call him, because of his family's ties to the cocaine cowboys. Apparently, that got around in the State Department. So now they're trying to pretend it's his DJ nickname.
Okay.
Which is my favorite. That's what Barnes is referencing. He's not referencing cocaine cowboys. No. Not how our family got wealthy after he came here. From Cuba, which he's busy trying to be president of. That's his real obsession at the moment. Everything's about Cuba. Venezuela's about Cuba. Everything else about Cuba. But so you dig in. So you look at the different stages of actions in Iran. We've bombed Iran. We've blockaded Iran. We've sporadically kind of invaded Iran, trying to get the enriched uranium that they disguised as a pilot rescue operation. I'll give Trump credit for certain things. He can BS his way through anything. He's tricked the markets now for 2 months straight. Oh, there's just about to be peace. They're just about to fold. Just about to be peace. Just about to fold. Just about to peace. It's unbelievable. And then while the insiders, who are probably Witkoff and Kushner, by the way, because they're the only constant connection, that are making hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars on inside information from the president, which a lot of people out there in Trump world don't know. They're shocked. Glenn Greenwald was at a debate. People were like, what? They didn't even know about the accusation. Least of all, the facts that support it. So, but you look at, we bombed them. We kind of invaded them under the prediction markets. It counted when we went in and got people out of the official narrative. Probably was a special op that went awry, and we're blockading them, and then we're sporadically engaging in what Trump himself bragged about. Hey, we're pirates, everybody. Piracy. We're stealing ships. We're firing on ships. We're kidnapping people. Isn't this great? It's incredible. If that isn't a sign of his mental decline, then just look up Laura Loomer, Monica Lewinsky, and Donald Trump and see if that isn't complete proof of his mental decline. But so under these legal standards, that's a declaration of war under the Constitution. And that has to come from Congress. He never got it. Second, it's under the War Powers Resolution Act. He can only initiate conflict if it was in his imminent risk of self-defense. There's simply no evidence of that. Joe Kent has rebutted it. DNI Tulsi Gabbard has rebutted it. Implicitly, by various testimony, Secretary Rubio and Secretary Hegseth have also both rebutted it. Mm-hmm. Trump himself sporadically has rebutted it by things he has stated. So it didn't meet the constitutional standard. It didn't meet the congressional standard. And it didn't meet any international law standard under the various conventions and treaties that we are signatories to, which are the highest law of the land under the Constitution of the United States, as well as the law of nations as expressed and respected in the Constitution of the United States, which also requires before you initiate kinetic conflict against another sovereign nation, you must be engaged in self-defense. And that has not occurred. That's not what happened here. And so because of it, it's at every level of analysis, the president's actions in Iran, whether you're talking about the bombing, whether you're talking about troops entering, whether you're talking about the blockade, has been illegal and unconstitutional and continues to be and will continue to be. And they're pretending that, that in the other provision of the War Powers Resolution Act is even if you thought it was self-defense, you have to stop and withdraw our troops after 60 days.
Right.
He's not. Instead, he's pretending that he can just declare a pause and thereby never have to comply with the War Powers Resolution Act and just pretend it's a new war. If he pauses for a minute, well, now that it's a new war, that's what I was like. They just said that we're not in war. We got out of the war that we were never in, and that if we get into a new war, it's not actually a new war because it never was a war. But if it is, it's okay. The war that was never a war is now over. But if the war restarts, it'll be a totally different war, not to say that it's a war at all, which is a legal crock,
right?
Constitutional crock. I see Glenn Beck out there yipping about all he cares about is the Constitution, Well, Glenn, you should be condemning the President of the United States for violating one of its core, most fundamental principles, which is getting us into war without a congressional declaration or authorization for that war.
Absolutely. That leads to probably my final question here, which is, I agree with you completely. Thank you for saying that. War powers has been my bread and butter since I got into the political realm about 8 years ago. Always cared deeply about it, but also really had the chance to work it up in the Senate on the Foreign Relations Committee and try to prevent things. Not always successful, actually probably batting zero in terms of that because there's so much opposition, but at least you get to learn a ton about it. But my final question for you about this is, you lay all these things out. It makes sense. It is the law of the land. It is the highest law we have, and probably it is the single most important piece of the Constitution, where if the president can effectively send your kids and your tax dollars overseas to be spent and to die in a conflict, then what rights do you have fundamentally underneath that? You don't. You can't control the lives of your children. You can't control the money you make. So what can you really do? The fix is within the legislature, which is supposed to be a co-equal branch of government, and it clearly is not. So how the heck do they take this back? What needs to happen?
Well, Congress needs to take action in multiple contexts. One is on the front end, continue to assert their authority whenever kinetic conflict begins. They politically like to run for cover and not get full votes on these activities, authorizing these activities so that they can take credit if it goes well and shift blame if it goes poorly. So but they can also take action on the remedial stage, which is that they can pursue impeachment of people who pursued war without a congressional authorization or declaration of it. And I think that's an appropriate remedy as punishment for those that go AWOL. And then I think future executive branches can look at bringing war crime prosecutions against those involved, because all of these are de facto war crime prosecutions when it wasn't in self-defense in the first place. The principles of necessity and proportionality apply across the board. They also apply to the attempts to talk about targeting civilian targets, civilian infrastructure, all the rest. But you look at it in aggregate, the Congress needs to start to assert its congressional authority, and there's probably no better way to do that than to re-elect congressmen like Thomas Massey, who are taking the lead doing precisely that.
Absolutely. And I think that if Massey gets back up there, survives this, I think he will. I hope he will. He needs a lot of support, but he's going to go back up there with a chip on his shoulder after having survived, this really unprecedented attempt to get rid of one congressman out of 400. And geez, man, but that shows you how important he is. Robert, thanks a ton for coming on. This was a blast. You have a 10,000 pound brain. Can't wait to have you back sometime. And would love to dive into all the other different aspects as one at a time, because I feel like I went through 4 different constitutional law classes, and I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And everybody, please go visit, was it 1776?
Yeah, 1776lawcenter.com.
Okay, there we go. All right, everybody, that is the week. We have survived the first week here on the Jim Webb podcast, and thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back Monday. Monday and Tuesday are going to be Libertarian Day here. We've got Kyle Anzalone coming up Monday, and then Scott Horton on Tuesday. So you're not going to want to miss that. I've only got Scott for an hour, but every time I talk to him, it's at least 1, probably 3. And we're going to try and translate that into a podcast. Please like and subscribe. Once again, we are independent media, and without your support, we don't exist. My kids don't eat. And if you like Charles in some of the videos, he doesn't eat either. So he eats after the kids. Anyways, everybody, thank you very much. Have a great weekend.